Will the House please come to order and members kindly take their seats? We are returning from a recess on Friday, May 23rd. Members, you received an email about House Bill 209. So the order of bills for this afternoon will be House Bill 209, followed by Senate Bill 127, and then we will wrap up with House Bill 482. We will also continue to monitor activity from the Senate and see if we have anything that we need to address. So with that, member from Cornwall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You would think after 9 years I would understand all the intricacies of floor procedure. Madam Speaker, earlier today, during our consideration of House Bill 209, which is an act relating to intranasal epinephrine in schools, we voted to concur in the Senate proposal of amendment with further proposal of amendment thereto as offered by the member from Glover and others. But we did not hear the full details of that further amendment thereto prior to our vote. I'm attesting that I voted on the prevailing side of the question, and I move that we suspend rules to permit immediate reconsideration of that question in order to hear the full details of the proposed further amendment thereto.
The member from Cornwall moves that we suspend our rules to permit immediate reconsideration of House Bill 209, which is an act relating to intranasal epinephrine in schools. To confirm for members, a vote in favor of this motion is to suspend rules to permit immediate reconsideration, which means that we will return to the question, shall the House concur in the Senate proposal of amendment with further amendment thereto, as offered by the member from Glover and others? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have voted to suspend our rules to permit immediate reconsideration of House Bill 209. House Bill 209 is an act relating to intranasal epinephrine in schools. The bill passed the Senate with a proposal of amendment that is printed in today's calendar. Member from Glover.
The amendment before you assures inclusion of licensed nurses working in independent schools. The committee voted unanimously in favor of this amendment, and we encourage the body's support.
Member from Glover moves that the House concur in the Senate proposal of amendment with further amendment thereto. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have concurred in the Senate proposal of amendment with further amendment thereto. Now we'll take up Senate Bill 127, which is an act relating to housing and housing development. The bill was referred to the Committee on General and Housing, which recommends that the House propose to the Senate to amend the bill as printed in today's calendar. The member from Calais, Representative Mahaly, will speak for the committee. And affecting the revenue of the state, the bill was referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, which recommends that the report of the Committee on General and Housing be amended as printed in today's calendar. The member from Woodstock, Representative Kimball, will speak for that committee. And then carrying an appropriation, the bill was referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which recommends that the bill ought to pass in concurrence with the proposal of amendment recommended by the Committee on General and Housing when further amended as recommended by the Committee on Ways and Means. The member from Middlebury, Representative Schy, will speak for that committee. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S-127, an act relating to housing and housing development.
Member from Calais.
Madam Speaker, your General and Housing Committee now will present at last S-127, a Senate bill that has become the vehicle for our committee's bill on housing. Colleagues may find the bill text at page 3495 of today's calendar. Madam Speaker, we have a housing emergency in this state. There's not enough housing, and what's available is beyond the reach of most Vermonters. This absence of affordable housing makes it hard for companies, schools, and local governments to find and to keep new employees. It contributes to our homeless problem. Young people and families cannot come to the state for lack of housing. This omnibus housing bill addresses these issues. It passed out of our committee on a bipartisan 10-1-0 vote, and it is really, and in our view, should be a tripartisan issue. It is the result of more than 4 months of hearing, including testimony from every sector involved. We heard from all the relevant agencies, from small and large developers, for-profit and nonprofit, from regional planning commissions, from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, housing advocacy groups, environmental advocacy groups, immigrant advocacy groups, from chambers of commerce, the Short-Term Rental Alliance, landlords and tenants and modular housing industry. I have a complete list of the over 55 witnesses for anyone who would like to review it. Madam Speaker, no one bill can solve the housing problem, and certainly not all at once, but this bill makes an excellent start. The legislation makes it easier to permit housing and more difficult to use appeals to delay housing projects. The bill makes it easier to finance housing and to finance related infrastructure. The bill would provide funding to develop housing that lower income and middle income Vermonters can afford to rent and buy. It provides for assistance to mobile home parks and owners, and has studies to enable us to legislate further promotion of prefabricated modular housing, as well as ways to acquire and rebuild abandoned and dilapidated housing. The companion funding provisions in the conference budget that we just voted out and that was just signed by the governor yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I guess, provides $65 million in funding for these housing programs. I do really want to thank the hard work of all the members of the General and Housing Committee, and especially note that we could not have produced this effort without the brilliant work of the Commerce and Economic Development Committee that drafted and held hearings on the CHIPS portion of the bill, the Ways and Means Committee, the Appropriations Committee, and the Environment Committee, as well as the thoughtful review of one section by the Human Services Committee, and of course, most important, our wonderful Legislative Council. As you can see, housing is an issue that cuts across much of the work of the legislature. Madam Speaker, I note that our original housing bill, H479, was passed by the House with a near unanimous voice vote on March 27th. Our version of S127, now before you, is a strike-all and contains nearly all the text of the original H479. As a result, as I walk through the specific sections of the bill, when I come to those original sections, which are identical to the bill we passed in March, my review will be, mercifully, I hope, brief. So, sections 1 through 5 of the bill are important and valuable, but they are identical to that passed by the House in March. Section 1, the Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program, known as VHIP, is refined slightly in this bill. VHIP, a most successful program, awards grants of up to $70,000 to landlords to bring units up to code for rental at below market levels for periods of 5 or 10 years. The Section 2, the Manufactured Home Improvement and Repair Program, it provides grants to home parks, to mobile home parks and mobile home owners for small-scale capital needs mobile home foundations, and mobile home rehab. The Infrastructure Sustainability Fund run by the Bond Bank, Section 3, this is a really important section of this bill. It's a program initiated in this bill, funded in the companion budget, and it's one of the important infrastructure funding elements that we have here. It provides quick and relatively easy infrastructure financing that will especially benefit smaller projects in small towns. Section 4 provides a small technical correction to the existing rental housing revolving loan program run by VHFA, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and provides what the title implies, below market financing to reduce rents on new rental construction. The Residential Universal Design Standards Committee and report has a really narrow goal. It wants to try to achieve consensus among agencies and the private development sector over the meaning of terms such as visitable, which are currently used in state statutes. So to provide clarity to existing law. Section 6 of the bill is new. It's originated in the Senate. It's a Housing and Residential Services Planning Committee and a report concerning houses for individuals with developmental disabilities. You know, it's been over 3 decades, Madam Speaker, since the closure of the Brandon Training School. And that closure released people with developmental disabilities into the community. In many cases, that meant into the care of their parents, who are now reaching ages where they can no longer necessarily provide the care they need to provide. And this section asks for the identification of options for the creation of 600 additional units of service-supported housing for the developmentally disabled. Sections 7 through 10 are identical to the versions passed by the House in March. Sections 7 through 9 improve the rental database by facilitating the integration of data from 2 existing sources. Section 10 requires a report on approaches to and funding for dealing with dilapidated or abandoned houses via creation of a land bank. Sections 11 through 14 are new. They add citizenship and immigration status to the list of protected classes in public accommodations and housing. This basic concept was created in the Senate and came over to us. It's been refined by the House General and Housing Committee to ensure that landlords can continue to perform background and credit checks necessary to their work, regardless of immigration status, and to ensure that landlords are not caught between state law and potentially evolving federal law. Specifically, in this regard, Section 11 provides that landlords will accept any of a Social Security number, an unexpired government issue ID, or a taxpayer ID, any of which our testimony showed, together with a name and a date of birth, are sufficient to obtain credit and background reports. Sections 14D and E are important. They give banks, lending entities, permission to consider immigration status where it's allowed by federal law. And the bankers now support this version, and provides for landlords that differential basis treatment on the basis of citizenship or immigration status is not a violation of Vermont law if it's required by federal law. Sections 15 through 19, 22, 23, and 24 are again identical to that passed by the House in March, so I'll review them in summary fashion. Section 15 through 17 limit appeals of municipal housing decisions to those who are truly able to meet the aggrieved person test, a standard test well understood in the courts that shows that the plaintiff has to demonstrate that they themselves have suffered specific damage to their person or property. Section 18 allows towns who so determine to approve bylaw amendments that are required by state law without hearings, and Section 19 advances the due date of the Land Use Review Board appeals process study, an important study on an important issue, from January 2026 to November of this year, so we have time to consider the report for possible legislation in the next session. Section 22 requires the Secretary of Natural Resources to prioritize housing in the processing and brownfields remediation. And Section 23 requires a report to the appropriate House and Senate committees of specific proposals to make the brownfields program substantially quicker and cheaper. And Section 24 appropriates $2.5 million to the Environmental Contingency Fund for brownfields, and this is consistent with the conference budget, Madam Speaker. Sections 20 and 21 are new. They come from the Senate and are designed to enhance the flexibility of A&R remediation processes. Sections 25 and 26 create the new Community and Housing Infrastructure Program, which is CHIPS. Our bond bank infrastructure program that I mentioned earlier and this CHIPS program are the key infrastructure financing devices in this bill to assist in the construction of infrastructure to support housing affordable to Vermonters. Madam Speaker, with your permission, I would like to begin discussion of the CHIPS by yielding to the representative from Coventry.
The member from Calais yields to the member from Coventry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I will just give an overview of those sections and then pass back to the member from Calais. I think everyone knows, understands what the TIF program does. We have, I think for many, many years, had discussions in your House Commerce and Economic Development Committee about project-based TIF, mini TIF. It's had some different names over the years. I would say that this is the first time that we've been able to move a bill working amongst several committees to get it to this position here on the floor. Sometimes it takes issues that we're in, such as what we're in now, the housing issue that the state is in, to get this to the floor. So some of the features of, let me back up a little bit. So the bill, as it came from the Senate, had a CHIP feature in it. However, it was not, we never had possession of the bill, but we do have authority over the subject matter on the policy pieces of TIF. And I want to thank the Housing and General Housing Committee for allowing us to spend what I think is 2 or 3 weeks on this bill, having many, many, many hours of discussion, testimony with all the partners and people who are looking to have this CHIP program put into place. So over those few weeks of discussion, many hours, we looked at what came over to us. And I think what struck us the most was that although this was called a community housing infrastructure program, it really only allowed or could allow for one housing unit to be built in order to take advantage of CHIP. And so we knew that we needed to put some parameters around that because this is for primary residential housing. Some of the features that are in these sections that came over from the Senate really make the process much easier for all communities, including our rural area communities. There's an opportunity for municipality, when they start having discussions with a developer or a sponsor, to make a decision on whether or not they want to be the entity that would bond, or through a contract process, work with the developer or the sponsor so that they are the ones that will go out and get the loan to provide the infrastructure that's needed to build these homes. When municipalities go out to bond, it takes a long time to get through that process. And so to give that option to our small communities will definitely help them go forward in being able to take advantage of CHIP. I think as we were looking at, you know, what should be the floor plan, how much housing should be in the plans. And I think we settled at 60%. But we really felt there needed to be a high component of housing because this is a housing bill, a primary housing bill. So at that point, we continued having discussions and we were getting some pushback on what would happen if an application came in and it was below 60%. We wanted to make sure that I think probably most of those applications that came in, we certainly didn't want them to be rejected just on that. So we created a chip board at that point that would look at those specific projects that came in under 60%, so that we would know if they were really meaningful residential primary housing for that community. And as we looked at, we also started thinking about how could we incent more building in mixed income housing. And so we looked at possibly 70% retainage for in general, and if projects wanted to come in and provide 20% of mixed income housing, we could go to 80%. As we worked on that, it became a little too much for us as we needed to move this out. So we dropped that and left it at 70%. I think you'll see that our House General Committee was able to figure that out when the member from Calais goes through the language. But in all, Madam Speaker, I think that what we sent over and the amendments that were made by our House General and Housing Committee were productive and helped us move the conversation forward. So I do want to thank, again, our General Housing Committee, also working with our Ways and Means Committee. I think it's been extremely collaborative as we move forward, as we have moved forward with this proposition. Your Committee on Commerce and Economic Development voted on a straw vote, voted 11-0-0 to move the language that we had created over to our House General and Housing Committee. And we also voted 11-0-0 on the amendment, the amended version from our House General and Housing Committee. So with that, Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield back to the member from Calais.
The member from Coventry yields to the member from Calais.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the representative from Coventry and his entire committee for their hard work on the CHIPS program. I will now take you through a quick review of the CHIPS bill as it passed out of the House General and Housing Committee after input from Commerce. At this point, I'm going to be brief and summary because the member from Woodstock will cover the key provisions and some proposed changes in his presentation of the Ways and Means Amendment, as well as a subsequent amendment proposed by the Chair and Vice Chair of Ways and Means, the Chair and Vice Chair of House Commerce and Economic Development, and myself, which I abbreviate as the 5-member amendment. Section 25, I'm back to the bill, contains the bulk of the CHIPS program. It begins at page 3519 of today's calendar. And it contains definition sections in 1906. The stated purpose of the CHIPS program in section 1907 is important. It references improvements to encourage the development of primary residences of lower moderate income housing, terms also defined in the text. This definition has been expanded in amendments and will be explained subsequently. Section 1908 provides the details of how municipalities may create a CHIPS housing infrastructure project. Section 1909 defines the context, the contents of a contract that is unique to CHIPS. This is really the heart of CHIPS. It's a contract, it's called the Housing Infrastructure Agreement. And it's a contract between the municipality on the one hand and a developer, a specific developer of a specific project, or a project sponsor. It could be a nonprofit, et cetera. Section 1910 details the contents of an application to the Vermont Economic Progress Council, known as VEPC. That's the entity within the Agency of Commerce and Economic Development that approves TIFs and would approve CHIP applications. This section includes a provision that at least 70% of the gross floor area ratio of a housing development must be devoted to actual housing use. And although it, as you'll hear, subsequent amendments leave it clear that it's up to VEPC to define what that means with some flexibility in its regulations. The section includes a specific location criteria for eligible projects, again, which were amended substantially in the Ways and Means Amendment and simply eliminated in the subsequent 5-member amendment. Section 19A and B define important technical criteria necessary for any tax increment financing, including the nature and process of surrounding indebtedness and the definition of tax increment. Section 19C defines the use of tax increment. Contained in this section is a key incentive for affordable housing by providing that affordable projects will receive additional increment above those that are not within the affordable definition. What eventually becomes mixed income, which you will hear. Again, as the representative from Woodstock will explain, this section has been amended in the Ways and Means Amendment. Sections 19C and D detail the requirements for periodic information reporting to VEPSI reporting to the legislature, and how auditing will occur. Section 19F provides a process for where the Secretary of Commerce and Community Development can issue guidance and decisions about CHIPS, and that VEPSI itself may adopt rules for implementing CHIPS. And Section 19G creates a separate entity, the Community Housing Infrastructure Program Board, which evaluates CHIP applications for certain specified purposes. Note that the function of this board was altered in the Ways and Means Amendment and then would be eliminated entirely in the 5-member amendment. And finally, Section 26 further expanded the location criteria, which you'll hear are now gone, but it expanded them in 2028. So subsequent amendments eliminate this provision. Members, I think you'll be pleased to know that we are now near the end of my report. Sections 27 and 28 are new technical updates on smoke and carbon monoxide alarms requested by the Department of Fire Safety. Section 29 provides for a VHFA study of off-site modular housing. This section is the same as approved by the House in March, except it was not funded in the conference budget. The agency, nonetheless, is sufficiently enthusiastic that it has indicated it will nonetheless proceed with the study, and this section still authorizes it with a less strict timetable. Section 30 are the effective dates. They're the same as approved by the House in March, with one exception. One section of the CHIPS program, which will be gone in a subsequent amendment, takes effect on January 1, 2028. As I mentioned earlier, Madam Speaker, Section S127 passed out of House General and Housing on a vote of 10-1-0. Thank you, Madam Speaker. That concludes my report, and we urge the body to approve our report and the bill. Thank you.
And now speaking for the Committee on Ways and Means, member from Woodstock.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The House Ways and Means Committee offers a strike-all amendment to the proposed amendment to S127 from the House General and Housing Committee. However, the amendment makes changes to sections 24 through 28 only, and one addition for the effective date in section 32. Members will be able to find the changes offered by the Ways and Means Committee starting on page 3559 of today's House calendar. The first instance of amendment is to make a technical correction that was brought to us regarding the authority to disperse funds for brownfield remediation. Section 24 authorizes the Secretary of Natural Resources to disperse up to $2 million of the remaining funds of the Environmental Contingency Fund for the assessment, planning, and cleanup of brownfield sites. This is a reversion of general fund dollars and a transfer to the Environmental Contingency Fund, which is also receiving a general fund appropriation of $9.5 million for a separate purpose to fund PCB remediation in school buildings. This $2 million is not restricted in the same way, but is earmarked for brownfield remediation. Together with other appropriations in the budget, there is dedicated $5 million towards brownfield remediation. Sections 25 through 28 concern the tax increment financing tool for the creation of housing, named the Community and Housing Infrastructure Program, or CHIP. The purpose of CHIP is to provide a more targeted, easier to administer tax increment financing tool than the existing statewide TIF program to accelerate the creation of new housing units in the state. Madam Speaker, we have had many discussions among members over recent weeks in committees and party caucuses and a caucus of the whole in the hallways and the State House cafeteria. It may be that everything that could be said about this amendment has been said. Keeping that in mind, I will keep my comments brief, or at least briefer than usual. S127 proposes to establish tax increment financing for the construction of new housing. It is a housing bill. It is an economic development bill. It is a tax bill. Your House Ways and Means Committee is charged with raising revenues for the support of state government. The committee is particularly focused on the proper use of public funds, with particular care applied to the statewide education property tax. CHIP uses the retention of education property tax and the local municipal property tax to pay for the infrastructure that will support new housing. Tax increment financing has the potential to be a self-fulfilling funding system. Investments in infrastructure spur the development of new construction or rehabilitation of existing buildings, raising the value of the existing property, resulting in higher property taxes paid to the state and to the municipality, which can then pay for the investments in infrastructure that were made. However, it is not a perfect system. It only works when the development occurs because of that investment in infrastructure in that place. If the development would have occurred anyway or would have occurred somewhere else, then the retention of the statewide education property tax to pay for it is effectively foregone revenue from the education fund, which could actually end up increasing property taxes for all Vermonters. That is why the Ways and Means Committee applied guardrails to the CHIP program by putting in one qualifier: would the needed infrastructure improvements not have occurred at all, or in a significantly different and less desirable manner, but for the proposed use of incremental tax revenues? In real estate development, the answer should be fairly easy to determine. Does the development, quote, pencil out without TIF? Yes or no? Vermont is the only state, no, Vermont is not the only state that uses the but-for test when administering TIF programs. They exist in 48 other states. Not all the tests are the same, and some are applied more vigorously than others. To limit the potential exposure to property taxpayers, we are proposing a cap on the annual exposure to the statewide education fund of approximately 1 cent on the state's grand list, or equal to $14 million per year. In the bill, you will see this is applied as a limit to the annual approvals of CHIP projects with an aggregate lifetime tax increment in the amount of $40 million. From the calculations provided by the Joint Fiscal Office, this program as proposed could retain $240 million in incremental statewide education property taxes over 20 years. That is a lot of money. Questions still remain outside this chamber outside and inside this chamber about the usefulness of the but-for test and the cap. In light of the need for real housing, members, why would the state spend taxpayers' dollars where they are not needed, or forego revenue when there is not a demonstrated need or public benefit? We have those discussions all of the time in this legislature, as we should. The but-for test is an important step to ensure that it is a necessary use of taxpayer dollars. And the cap is an essential limit to a brand new program for which we don't have any track record or realistic projections of how much will be used. We are fulfilling our role as stewards of public funds to exercise due diligence and prudence in committing the property tax dollars of our constituents. The previous bills introduced in this legislature to create project-based TIF programs could not overcome the concern about the impact on the education fund. This time, it's different. The critical need for housing is real. We all recognize that and want to support programs that will meaningfully contribute to the solution. That includes tax increment financing, but tax increment financing with the right bumpers. Let us not think that CHIP is the magic tool that will solve our housing needs. Yes, as proposed, CHIP could provide the financing necessary to build infrastructure to support the development of 2,000 to 7,000 new housing units. That would be an incredible addition to the 2,400 or so housing units created per year in Vermont now. In the rest of this bill, there are other tools, such as the Vermont Infrastructure Sustainability Fund, with the initial funding of $7.5 million that this legislature has already approved. That will help too. Last year, this body made many changes to permitting. That will help and has already helped. But creating new housing units still faces other challenges, such as the shortage of labor, other permitting and zoning challenges, high material costs, and sometimes local opposition to new projects. Let us continue to work together to look for solutions, including CHIP, to meet the needs. Madam Speaker, members can find a joint fiscal note for this bill dated May 6, 2025, as well as a detailed spreadsheet provided by the Joint Fiscal Office on the updated CHIP increment retention caps dated May 16, 2025 on our committee's webpage. So here are the changes as proposed by Ways and Means. In section 1906, found on page 3560, we removed the definitions of households of low and moderate income and instead created the idea of middle income so that the program could incentivize the construction of a greater range of housing, including low, moderate, and middle income housing, because all housing is needed. On page 3560, improvements. It limits the use of funding to focus on the improvements necessary for the creation of housing, to serve a public good and fulfill the purpose of creating housing. Page 3561 creates a new term, that of a lifetime education property tax increment retention. The total education property tax increment to be retained for a housing infrastructure project across its lifetime. And middle income housing, housing that is supposed to subject to a housing subsidy covenant of perpetual duration. And middle income housing development in which at least 20% of which the units located there are middle income housing. Section 1907, page 3562, for those following along. It refines the purpose of the use of TIF to, quote, encourage the development of new primary residences for households of low or moderate income that would not be created but for the infrastructure improvements funded by the program, end quote. Section 1908, housing development site, removes from TIF any contiguous parcels that are not being developed, requiring the project to stand alone. It does not prevent necessary improvements from being made on non-contiguous parcels. Section 1909 and page 3563 is the housing infrastructure agreement. This ensures that the housing units will be created for primary residents not only at the time of the initial offering, but in perpetuity. Section 1910, page 3564, adds the requirement that the CHIP board approve applications. On 3400 adds the but-for test, modifies the language from TIF statute directly. And it says, VEPC shall determine whether the infrastructure improvements proposed to serve the housing development site and the proposed housing development would not have occurred as proposed in the application or would have occurred in a significantly different and less desirable manner than as proposed in the application, but for the proposed utilization of the incremental tax revenues. In section D, some minor wording changes. And E, the project criterion. When the bill was passed to us, it had a 70% requirement for floor space dedicated to housing. We lowered that to 65%. And then we reworked the role of the CHIP board, so it was an approving entity and not in the role of reviewing only some of the criteria. That is later changed in a following amendment. In location criteria, on page 3565, we revised the locations to designated centers for which exemptions from Act 250 were extended through January 1st, 2027, and within 1/2 mile from existing settlements that are either a designated center or an existing center that is compact in form and size. There is a later proposal to remove all location criteria. We added middle income criteria to qualify for the higher tax increment percentage. And in H, a tax increment financing plan is revised to include the lifetime education property tax increment retention. And that also VEPC is to recommend applications to the CHIP board for approval. And on page 3566, to establish an annual approval amount of CHIP projects to $40 million in aggregate lifetime education property tax increment retention. It's important to note that $40 million of increment retention over 20 years equates to approximately $145 to $240 million in increased investment in that first year. Then we have no changes to the bill until in section 1910C, the use of tax increment retention period, it lowers the education tax increment retention percentage from 70% to 60% for projects that do not meet the requirement of 20% of housing units qualifying as middle income. It keeps the 80% retention rate for ones that do and have 20% of the units as middle income. Page 3569 in terms of the adjustment of percentage changes, the date at which the retention rate is reviewed is shortened from 10 years to 5 years. And that means, members, that VEPSI will have the ability to look at the cash flow of a certain housing infrastructure project, housing development project, and be able to determine whether or not there's sufficient cash flow to shorten the length of the loan or increase or decrease the amount of increment retained to pay back that loan. Okay, information reporting on page 3571 in the annual reports on CHIP required of EPSI, it adds one line that says, quote, and evaluation of the amount of public funds flowing to private ownership or usage. And C, it moves up the report from VEPSI to the legislature on the performance of CHIP by 5 years to January 15th, 2030. In rulemaking, section 1910F on page 3572, it specifically requires VEPSI to develop rules to govern the prioritization of applications that take into consideration not only the purpose of CHIP, but also blight, a word that is changed in a later amendment, and regional equity to ensure that projects do get across the entire state of Vermont, and verifiable housing shortages and also labor sheds. Also, rulemaking to determine the appropriate floor area measure for purposes of the project criterion, where 65% of that floor area is dedicated to housing. In that sense, we had discussions, Madam Speaker, about if you're renovating a school and there's a gymnasium in the school, does it count towards the number of housing units? Well, we're requiring VEPSI to develop rules on that and not leaving it to the legislature at this particular point in time. And also to submit draft rules to the Joint Fiscal Committee for review 45 days prior to submitting to ICAR. In section 1910 on page 3573 is the creation of the CHIP board, but we reconfigured the CHIP board to include housing finance experts and approve all CHIP projects. It removed their role for hearing appeals and asked the board to provide legislature with recommended changes in the process or membership of their board. That is later changed in another amendment. In section 26, in the Vermont Economic Progress Council, it adds CHIP to the list of authorities and duties of EPSI and adds CHIP to the paragraph on decisions not subject to review. In section 27, the statewide tax increment financing program, or Big TIF, it sets a sunset date on the statewide TIF program of July 1st, 2028. And you'll see that later changed in another amendment. And the idea there, Madam Speaker, was with the startup of a new program that's also in the tax increment financing space, we felt it was necessary to review both programs, Big TIF, Little TIF, Mini TIF, Project TIF, CHIP, in terms of how they intersected, what the effect was, how they were being taken up. Madam Speaker, we heard from a lot of people. We heard from 3 attorneys from the Office of Legislative Counsel, 2 fiscal analysts from the Joint Fiscal Office, the senior fiscal analyst from the Joint Fiscal Office, the vice chair of the House Committee on Commerce and Economic Development, the chair of the House Committee on General and Housing, the chair of the House Committee on Environment and Energy, the director of Property Valuation and Review of the Department of Taxes, the program manager of the Vermont Department of Taxes, the state auditor at the State Auditor's Office, the commissioner of the Department of Housing and Community Development, the community planning and policy manager at the Department of Housing and Community Development, the interim commissioner of the Department of Economic Development, grant programs manager at VEPSI, the executive director of VEPSI, the Vermont Economic Progress Council, the chair of the Vermont Economic Progress Council, the vice president of Land Use and Development for Smart Growth America, the director of research for Smart Growth America, the executive director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, the director of community relations at Champlain Housing Trust, our legislative economist, the director of policy and special projects of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, a founding member of the board of directors of the Friends of Vermont Public Education, the municipal policy and advocacy specialist of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, the associate director of outreach at AARP Vermont, the executive chairperson of Let's Build Homes, and the president of Whitenburg Real Estate Investment Advisors. Madam Speaker, your committee on Ways and Means voted this amendment favorably of 10-0-1, and we ask for your support.
And now speaking for the Committee on Appropriations, member from Middlebury.
Madam Speaker, my report will be short. The House Appropriations Committee reviewed the Committee on Housing and General's amendment to S-127 The appropriations relating to are back to the programs based on House General in S127. This is not CHIP related. That were passed. The appropriations that originally in that bill were passed by the House, which was signed by the governor this past Wednesday. However, there are 2 instances of per diems that were not stipulated in the budget. Those in Section 5 relating to a residential universal design study committee, and Section 6, the State Housing and Residential Services Planning Committee. In each of these cases, the per diem costs will be covered through the budget of the Department of Housing and Community Development. The committee reports favorably on this amendment by a vote of 8-3-0.
Now, the member from Ferrisburg, Representative North, offers an amendment to the report of the Committee on Ways and Means that begins on page 3576 of today's calendar. Member from Ferrisburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for offering me the opportunity to present a very, very brief amendment. I present this amendment that is directly applicable and eminently germane to the S127
Member
bill.
from Heartland, what is your point of order?
Madam Speaker, this is a bill about housing and the financing of housing. This amendment is about land use regulation, and I believe it significantly expands the scope of the bill and is not germane.
Member from Heartland, I find your point of order well taken. None of the provisions of...
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Member from Pulteney.
Okay, I haven't heard the amendment yet.
Can I see the members at the podium, please? House to stand in recess. Will the House please come to order? Members kindly take their seats. Will the House please come to order? Member from Heartland, I do find your point of order well taken. After consulting with the group and with our clerk, none of the provisions of Senate Bill 127 propose amendments to land use regulations. On the other hand, this amendment would amend provisions of Act 250 to extend the sunset of current law exemptions from Act 250 review for specified housing projects from January 1st, 2027 to December 31st, 2031 to align with the sunset of CHIP. None of the CHIP language would allow building in areas not permissible under current law. Therefore, the amendment deals with a separate topic of land use regulations and introduces the independent question of amending Act 250 exemptions. So I find your point of order well taken. This amendment is not germane and cannot be considered. And so with that, we will now turn to the member from Woodstock and others who offer an amendment to the report of the Committee on Ways and Means that begins on page 3580 of today's calendar. Member from Woodstock.
I'd like to thank the member from Ferrisburg for pointing out that my recollection of the vote count was incorrect. I said 10-01 as as the bill came out of our committee or amendment. It was actually 9-02. Yes. Thank you. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to present an amendment to the Strike All House Ways and Means Amendment from myself and other House colleagues, the Chair of Commerce and Economic Development, the Chair of Government and Housing, the Chair of Ways and Means, the Vice Chair of Commerce and Economic Development, and myself, Ranking Member of House Ways and Means. Madam Speaker, we heard the concerns from our fellow House members and worked together to find a path forward that would enable us to move forward this important piece of legislation this session. We believe that these changes make the bill better, simplifying where possible, clarifying where necessary, and bringing things into better alignment with the intent of the bill. Members will find the amendment beginning on page 3580 of today's House calendar. The first instance of amendment is on page 3580 in the definition section of the bill. It goes on to page 3581. We've replaced the term of middle income housing with mixed income housing to better reflect the intent to create housing for a mixture of households of low, moderate, and middle income. That was not clear in the earlier amendment. This continues the idea that mixed income housing developments are those in which at least 20% of the housing units are considered mixed income. This is important in the qualification for a higher increment retention that is elsewhere in the bill. The second instance of amendment is in section 1907 in the purpose section on page 3582. This makes clear that the purpose of the program is to encourage the development of new primary residences for households of low and moderate income across both rural and urban areas of all Vermont counties. By inserting that language, it is important when VEPC is reviewing applications to prioritize projects that meet the purpose of the CHIP program. The third instance of amendment, section 1910, page 3584, is in housing infrastructure project application with VEPC. This amendment is notable for the absence of the CHIP board in the approval process. The CHIP board is eliminated in this section. Also absent is any location criteria for projects. The members felt collectively that it is better to leave CHIP as a financing tool and the location of a project left up to the stakeholders involved in the process and the land use regulations that this body has already developed and is elsewhere in statute and rule. So there is no location criteria for whether it is in an existing settlement, and exempt from Act 250, Tier 1A, Tier 1B, Tier 2, none of that is in this amendment. On 3585, it replaces middle income with mixed income housing for the purpose of determining the allowable tax increment retention percentage. In approval, in paragraph G, it requires VEPC to render a decision on completed housing infrastructure project applications within 45 days. We heard many people concerned that the process was going to take too long, but we also have to give VEPC the opportunity to form a complete application. So 45 days from the date that the project application is complete. In H, the limit. page 3586. In response to concerns that the $40 million cap is not enough, we are proposing that VEPSI have the ability through the governor's office to increase the cap by $5 million in lifetime increment retention projects. This process already exists for the Vermont Employment Growth Incentive in statute. A $5 million increase may not seem like a lot until you consider what supports in new development. Doing the math backwards, you get approximately $29 million in additional investment. That's meaningful. The fourth instance of amendment, section 1910F on page 3592 in rulemaking. There's a minor word change and replace the word blight with vacancy or dilapidation, as we had discussed earlier. Also tasks VEPSI to develop rules that supplement the but-for test to make it easier to administer for CHIP projects. We did hear a lot of concern about what but-for meant. And in this case, we're asking VEPSI to develop more clear and explicit language of projects that can meet the but-for test. It also eliminates the requirement to submit rules to the Joint Fiscal Committee 45 days before submitting them to the Interagency Committee on Administrative Rules. Again, over concern about taking too long. The fifth instance of amendment is in section 26, page 3593 of the bill. And this is about the Vermont Economic Progress Council's structure and duties. Instead of standing up a CHIP board, a separate board, this amendment proposes to add 3 members to the VEPSI board exclusively for the purposes of deciding CHIP projects. There's 2 voting members, the Executive Director of Vermont Housing Finance Agency and the Executive Director of the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, or their designees. And to add 1 non-voting member, the Commissioner of Housing and Community Development, who also is within the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, in which also VEPSI sits. The sixth and final instance of amendment in section 27, page 3594, is about the statewide TIF. This extends the proposed sunset date for TIF to co-terminate with a term of CHIP on December 31st, 2031. This gives us time to see the uptake on CHIP and how it interplays with the statewide TIF programs, at the same time that we have volatility at the federal level and unknown spending implications of the statewide education fund. Madam Speaker, we believe that these 6 proposals of amendment make the bill much better. We know that every person or groups of persons in this chamber feel like their specific needs may not be addressed, but we hope to address as many as possible. This is a great improvement and moves the bill forward. And we humbly, the 5 members, ask for your support.
Member from Calais.
Madam Speaker, your Committee on General and Housing reviewed the amendment, the 5-member amendment, and by a straw poll of 8-1 finds favorable for the amendment because we thought it was a good idea that we recognize that this proposal overall is really a financing proposal. It's not a land use bill. And so we really felt good about the removal of all the land use criteria from the bill. Also, we felt that it was very responsive to those who felt the process had gotten too complex and long because of this new board that reviewed VEPSI. And after some consideration, we realized that what we wanted to do was just add housing expertise to the process. And the simplest and easiest way to do that was just to put housing experts on the VEPSI board when they review CHIP projects and to impose a 45-day limit. And we liked the additional flexibility on the cap. The cap already will permit somewhere between 4,000 and 7,000 approximately housing units to be assisted with infrastructure financing, but still, if this project should be really successful, giving the governor the ability to request every year an additional $5 million in programming would be really a good idea. So that was the reason for our positive straw poll. Thank you.
Member from Coventry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Your Committee on Commerce and Economic Development had the opportunity to look at the amendment, and on a straw poll vote of 10-0-1, found it favorable.
Members, now the member from Dover, Representative Sibilia, and others offer an amendment to the amendment offered by the member from Woodstock and others that begins on page 3595 of today's calendar. Member from Dover.
Madam Speaker, this amendment was developed through work and hearing from various experts and representatives of rural Vermont at the Rural Caucus over this session. We've heard a lot about implementation of Act 181 and how public engagement is going with that. We've talked about education reform, and we've specifically talked about what to do with existing empty buildings in rural Vermont, municipal buildings, and future potentially empty buildings in rural Vermont. I would say that many members of that caucus, many members from rural Vermont are really appreciative of the work that was done in the amendment to the Ways and Means Amendment to remove the location criteria and the CHIP board to stay with existing land use law and to remove that bit of complexity. I would also say that I think the concerns with the original Ways and Means Amendment were significant and of many aspects of it. And so even with the good work of this amendment, which is really appreciated, there continued to be concerns. And we surveyed members of the Rural Caucus in a democratic fashion, asked them to rank those concerns, and have provided the top three. Notably, they don't include some really big guardrail pieces like the cap or the sunset of TIF and CHIP. They don't include language that is extremely problematic for our towns about the in perpetuity language. This amendment effectively does three things. It will, in the first amendment, adds to the improvements additional utilities. We just fail to understand why we would not include all utilities here when we're building housing. In the second instance of amendment, and I want to be specific, that is electric utilities. In the second instance of amendment, we are looking at, make sure I have this right, increasing or decreasing the minimum floor area to 51%. Again, we have talked extensively about empty buildings, about planning for empty buildings, about what other communities have done with empty buildings, perhaps schools, for instance. And in small communities with limited capacity and big buildings, the likelihood that that is going to be pretty significant mixed use is high. And the remaining instances of amendment all have to do with removing the but for, both out of the purpose section, removing the test from the application, and striking it out in, as a consideration for rulemaking. So with that prioritization, with that amendment developed, we asked Rural Caucus members who would like to sign on. We now have this tripartisan amendment from 14 members of the Rural Caucus that we've brought forward to offer. And I would note, Madam Speaker, that consensus means that you don't always get everything you want. And so there's a lot here that people want that's still not on the table. I would also note that in this building, consensus is achieved through the votes of any 76 members. And I think there's been a fair amount of support. I think there are also a fair amount of sore arms on this amendment. And, we ask for your consideration. Rural Vermont does not have the capacity, is looking at multiple issues here in terms of climate issues, disaster impacts, education, healthcare. And so the less complexity we can get, the more likely we are to be able to try and save our communities. So we'll ask for your support.
For the Committee on Ways and Means, member from Woodstock.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We'd like to thank the member from Dover and her co-sponsors for bringing the amendment to our attention. Madam Speaker, we did vote to find the amendment unfavorable by a vote of 9-2, and I'd like to tell you why. We felt very strongly about the but-for test. TIF only works when the development occurs because that investment in infrastructure happens in that place. If the development would have occurred anyway, then why would we use public funds? The retention of statewide education property tax, if used incorrectly, amounts to foregone revenue from the education fund and could end up increasing property taxes for all Vermonters. That is why the Ways and Means Committee applied the but-for test. Would the needed infrastructure improvements not have occurred at all or in a significantly different and less desirable manner but for the proposed use of increment funds? Why would the state spend taxpayers' dollars where they are not needed or forego revenue when there is not a demonstrated need or public benefits? The but-for test is an important step to ensure this is a necessary use of taxpayers' dollars. On utilities, Madam Speaker, we felt that utilities do have access to other sources of capital, and we were trying to use TIF money, state taxpayers' money, to really fund infrastructure that was common to all infrastructure projects. In terms of the percentage, we felt that this was a housing bill, and that to have a higher requirement, the 65% of the floor space be dedicated to housing was appropriate, and wanted to stick with that. Again, Madam Speaker, your House Ways and Means Committee found this as an unfavorable amendment by a vote of 9-2.
Member from Coventry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too would like to thank the member from Dover, thank the sponsor, her co-sponsors as well. And I know that as someone who represents rural Vermont as well, appreciate their enthusiasm for making sure that rural Vermont is taken care of. However, we also struggled with the 51% floor plan because this is a bill designed for primary residents. As I indicated prior, when I was giving an overview, that we created the chip board at that time to make sure that any application that comes in that is under now 65% would have gone to the chip board to make sure that if it worked, if it made sense, that it could be approved. The changes that we made when we removed the chip board and added housing members to the VEPSI board. And through rulemaking, we believe that VEPSI can be more flexible in allowing those projects to move forward if they're in a rehab situation, such as any municipal buildings or public schools that may have closed, to rehab those buildings into residential, primary residences. Also, discussing the but-for, we believe that the but-for will not provide more administrative difficulties for VEPSI, that they do it now, but we also feel that it will be baked into the application process, that the municipalities will have to, I think they want to make sure, because their dollars are going to be tied up as well, make sure that those projects are going where they want them, and that the need for that infrastructure is true and real. So the motion in House Commerce and Economic Development was to find the amendment a friendly amendment, and on a vote of 281, we find it is to be unfriendly. Thank you.
And member from Calais.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too, I guess for the third time, would like to thank the member from Dover and the co-sponsors for really engaging with us over this. We found the amendment as unfavorable by a vote of 281 for the reasons that you've heard from the representative from Woodstock and the representative from Coventry. We think anyone who applies for a project, a CHIPS project, anyone is going to have to demonstrate that they need the money. If they can't demonstrate they need the money, they shouldn't be applying and they won't get it. And to demonstrate you need the money, you have to put together a spreadsheet that shows what the project looks like financially. And anyone who's a real estate person can look at that spreadsheet and determine, I think, pretty quickly whether or not that project would work without the subsidy that comes from the infrastructure funding through CHIPS. Yes or no? I don't think it's that hard. And it's the kind of thing that's going to happen in any case. As to the 51%, we felt, as you heard, this is a housing amendment. It's not for commercial development. We understood from Representative Sibilia that the concern was flexibility to deal with rehabilitation. You know, what about the gymnasium or the theater in a high school, et cetera? And we felt that this is the kind of thing that could be easily dealt with by VEPSI in its definition of what counted in the floor area ratio of 65%. And we supported the but-for test for the reasons indicated. Thank you.
So the question is, shall the amendment offered by the member from Woodstock and others be amended as offered by the member from Dover and others? Are you ready for the question? Member from Fairfax.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm standing this afternoon in support of the amendment from the member of Dover, and here's why. Nearly a year ago, I stood on this floor against Act 181 because we were ignoring the voices of rural Vermont. And once again, if this amendment were to fail, I'm concerned that the voices of rural Vermont would not be heard. So we're hearing that the but-for test. My issue with the but-for test is not that it is inherently bad, but I do not believe that we can have a bill with the but-for test and a cap. It's like speaking out of both sides of your mouth. We're saying that this increment would not happen, or that we would not be able to develop but for this increment. And yet we have a cap that is also putting a barrier and guardrails on the education fund. I think we're all here. We went door to door. We heard the concerns about education, about property taxes. We must protect the ed fund. But we have put so many guardrails up. We have now created Jersey barriers. And I think if we are thinking about the 51%, the original intent of the bill had the CHIP board make decisions on one thing and one thing alone, and that was if the percentage is not met at 60%, at 70%, is this still good for our communities? And part of the application was a municipality had to say, this is what we want, this is what we need. So once again, we are taking away local control from our municipalities and our towns. So I appreciate the leadership of Rural Caucus bringing this forward, bringing the voices of rural Vermont, of our small towns here to this chamber, because I think often we don't hear it. We don't hear their voices saying, what about us? Every town needs housing. And I am so appreciative of the work of all committees, of my committee who has worked tirelessly on the underlying bill itself. But I am concerned with the direction that it has taken. And so that is why today I am standing in support of the Rural Caucus amendment, or excuse me, of the amendment offered by the rep from Dover. And I just, again, I want to reiterate how important this program is. But I think we need to be cautious of the amount of barriers we are once again putting in front of housing. Because I was born in the 90s, and I am now living in a time where we were worse off for housing than we were back in the 80s. That's not progress. And progress needs to be not just how far we've come, because you're going to hear today that this is the farthest we've gotten on project-specific TIF. But progress cannot only be measured and should not only be measured by how far we've come, but if our actions have risen to the moment, and I'm not sure they have.
Member from Chittenden.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I signed on to this amendment not because I think it's the perfect answer, probably still too restrictive from my own viewpoint of what it will allow this tool to be used. However, I really do appreciate the work of the Rural Caucus in trying to find some common ground, find that consensus that can move it forward. With this amendment, again, while it's not perfect, I will support it, and I will support the bill. Without this amendment, quite frankly, from my viewpoint and for many of us in rural Vermont, the bill before us is too restrictive and will not give us the results that perhaps we hope for. Madam Speaker, I urge our colleagues to vote yes on this amendment, and when the vote is taken, I ask that it be done by roll.
The member from Chittenden requests that when the vote is taken, it be taken by roll. Is the member sustained? The member is sustained. When the vote is taken, it will be taken by roll. Will the House please come to order? The question is, shall the amendment offered by the member from Woodstock and others be amended as offered by the member from Dover and others, member from Norwich?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I first want to thank the various committees for putting together a bill that is not a one-size-all bill. It is a buffet of options and tools that hopefully will go a long way towards addressing our housing crisis. To add and protect housing, we all know we need municipal infrastructure. We need it for stormwater, wastewater, drinking water. As one developer told me, if you build those systems, we will come. And as a friend in Greensboro told me just this week, her town needs stormwater management and wastewater. So frankly, the town properties can stop flooding her house every year. She's pretty excited that they might be able to use some of the tools in this bill so that she doesn't worry about that river running through her basement. Most of us in the legislature agree we need to significantly step up our housing efforts. We know infrastructure is essential to that. And I appreciate all we are doing to try to pull in that same direction. However, when we use taxpayer dollars, we have an obligation to the public to spend the least amount of taxpayer money per housing unit to get the job done. Just enough to get these projects over the hump and not a penny more. And when we say we are trying to build housing for Vermonters, we need to make sure we are not using property taxes to build more second homes or ski chalets that are used as Airbnbs. One piece of testimony that we received in our committee referenced as the kind of project that might be eligible for CHIP, a Chittenden County project with units that now sell for over $1 million. Is that the housing that we need to raise education property taxes to subsidize? Or given those prices, would that developer have built luxury housing anyway? Why fund utilities when they have access to cheaper loans for that very purpose? These are examples of why I do not support this amendment. We should be trying to make sure that our tax dollars are used for shared public purposes, items like municipal wastewater and water systems that benefit everyone and not just those who are private developers who can get to the front of the line. We need these but-for protections, as weak as they are, to make sure that our dollars support work where it's needed in areas that can't and will not turn a corner without help. We received data from the tax department, and if you look at the half of the towns that have the least new growth in their grand list, they're disproportionately rural. We need this but-for provision to make sure that people target these developments at those areas. But without the but-for provision, why would any developer build in Vermont without waiting for government subsidy? And do we really think the state of Vermont has a robust enough economy to support luxury housing or the subsidy of every developer? These so-called restrictions are taxpayer protections so that we don't create perverse incentives that actually slow down or raise the cost of development. They are protections that ensure that every dollar goes farther and that we end up with more money to fund additional municipal infrastructure or housing investment for the people of this state, the people who want to put down roots and live here and raise their families. Surely the developers and the lobbyists asking for dollars don't think taxpayer funds should be used to build second homes or short-term rentals to be listed on Airbnb. Certainly, voters in my community have been very, very clear they do not want that. The changes proposed in the 5-member amendment make sure that CHIP program builds primary residences, homes and apartments, and not those second homes and short-term residences. These protections make sure taxpayer dollars go where they are wanted and needed, as the representative from Coventry said, and not just to the people with the resources to get to the front of the line the fastest. The removal of the location language in conjunction with this but-for protection ensures that. These protections make sure projects that address long-term affordability get priority consideration. For people who want simplicity, I want to again thank the House General and Housing Committee because they made sure that there are a number of tools in this bill. So try the bond bank or the Infrastructure Sustainability Fund or one of the other programs in the bill. If CHIP isn't your tool, there are other tools in there, and thank you to the committees for putting those in. There are risks to the proposed CHIP program. I'm willing to take those risks, and I thank the member from Woodstock. I don't feel like my arm is twisted, but I do feel we've had very good, robust conversation. And I support the House Ways and Means Amendment and the 5-member amendment because we need this housing, and we need it in places that will not have access to CHIP if we don't add the protections like the but-for clause. But I can't support this amendment that's before us now because if this passes, this program would almost be certain to disproportionately fund projects in Vermont's larger and more economically vibrant communities, not in the communities that actually most need this support. This amendment makes the CHIP program into a transfer of wealth from taxpayers to developers and from rural towns to Northwest Vermont. So I do hope that you'll join me in voting no on this amendment, and I hope you'll join me in making sure our communities use the tools in this bill, the underlying bill without the amendment, to get the housing that our people need.
The question is, shall the amendment offered by the member from Woodstock and others be amended as offered by the member from Dover and others? Member from Dover.
Madam Speaker, I want to remind us all that this program will have two sets of investors and two sets of public funds coming into it. Our municipalities will also be investing with their voters, which is another check on this. I suppose it is possible that our municipalities will find that it's advantageous in a housing crisis to invest their municipal dollars in second homes. Madam Speaker, I understand the need for guardrails, and I spoke to that when we had the caucus of the whole. It is important that we do our job, that we provide oversight. Again, there are so many guardrails on land use and financing tools. It's possible to consider perhaps that's part of the problem. I will also note, we've seen some pretty massive investment in housing over the last 5 years through federal subsidies without this, but for housing that largely is for low and middle income folks, that largely is not for, say, teacher and a nurse, who would not qualify at the income levels for that. The fear that we have here about this project going amok, I think we really need to listen to ourselves and maybe put ourselves back in our communities and think about explaining that to regular Vermonters, that we want to make sure that we don't build too much housing, or too much of the wrong kind of housing, or that we don't let communities invest in the housing that is appropriate for their communities, that their voters support and presumably are in touch with what they need. Again, we're not getting everything here. There was a lot that folks were not happy about. And there are some pretty significant guardrails still in here. Sunsetting the entire TIF and CHIP program in 2031, that's a big deal. That's 6 years from now. We're not going to be out of the housing crisis by then. We're definitely going to be coming back and looking at what's working, what's not working. This cap, big deal. Public meeting in our municipalities to even do this, big deal guardrail. I think we've got a pretty good balance. Actually, I'm not sure that we have a pretty good balance. We're probably still a little too restrictive here. We're asking, but the but for is so implicit in this moment. That's what I have to say at this point. We urge the body's support. Again, lots of guardrails in existing law and moving forward in this bill. Thank you.
Are you ready for the question? Member from Rockingham.
Madam Speaker, I stand in opposition to this amendment. I support the hard work of the committees and appreciate the delicate balance they've navigated to provide a fiscally responsible housing plan for Vermont. Vermonters have made it clear that housing is a top priority for the state, and they have also strongly communicated their desire for affordability. This amendment puts those goals at risk. The current bill as proposed by the 4 relevant committees, threads the needle on a solid housing plan for Vermont, and I do not want to weaken that work. Please join me in voting no for this amendment.
The question is, shall the amendment offered by the member from Woodstock and others be amended as offered by the member from Dover and others? Member from Berkshire.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we all know, Vermont is in a housing crisis. In rural areas, which represent 2/3 of Vermont, there is very little thoughtfully planned housing development in the works. Contributing factors to our housing crisis are a complex regulatory structure and the staggering capital investment necessary to build infrastructure that doesn't currently exist in small towns. Access to public water, wastewater, utilities, broadband. Additionally, our very small downtowns are struggling. Commerce has left our downtowns, leaving behind boarded up windows and rotting roofs. Rural schools and general stores are closing, and more may be on the horizon. Buildings are being left vacant in communities all across the state. Rural communities need help with the upkeep or repurposing of these buildings if we expect our communities to remain vibrant. CHIP, as its acronym infers, was conceived as a tool to assist small communities with infrastructure projects that in turn would jumpstart housing development in areas where it is needed most. We need housing in locations that make sense. In particular, in rural areas, we need tradespeople, nurses, and teachers, for instance, to live where our small industries, hospitals, and schools are located. We cannot ask those folks to travel great distances to work in locations where the average pay may be much lower than what is being offered in larger municipalities. Unfortunately, this is what's currently happening. Our school boards and hospital and small manufacturing HR departments routinely turn away qualified candidates who cannot secure housing. If municipalities were able to access CHIP funding to repurpose or rehabilitate a vacant public building, such as a school or a general store, into usable housing, and not be required to utilize the majority of the floor space for dwelling space, a building with a gymnasium or a commercial space would be able to be included in this critical infrastructure funding program and could still be used as community space for daycares, senior centers, community meeting spaces. This amendment requires floor area for housing to be capped at 51% of the usable space, and your support for this provision is respectfully requested.
Are you ready for the question? Member from Putney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank everyone for their hard work and deliberations on this. I'm standing as a member from rural Vermont. I represent 2 small towns of 2,000 each with limited town staff. One of our towns has a town manager, the other doesn't. So we rely on lots of volunteer help to get things done in town. I had questions about this bill. I had questions about how it was going to help towns like mine and other similar towns. Wasn't just looking out for ours, but this is a big picture right across the state of Vermont. I do appreciate, though, that my questions were answered. I think that the committee, the Ways and Means Committee, took a lot of time listening, explaining, going back and explaining again what they've done. And I appreciate that they were able to answer my questions and perhaps others. And so I stand in support of the work of the committee, and I don't think this amendment is necessary. So I will be voting against the amendment and supporting the work of your Ways and Means Committee. Thank you.
Member from Stowe.
Madam Speaker, first of all, I want to join all of the members in thanking the committees, their leadership, their collaboration. But I actually have a question. By the way, I am a co-sponsor of the what's called the Sibilia of a rep from Dover amendment. But I'm really a little confused because I come from a town where there's a plethora of multi-million dollar, someone used the word chalets, but I'll call them ski houses or vacation homes. And we have zero available moderate income, lower moderate income housing stock. That's a real crisis. So I'm really confused, and I don't know if I'd like to ask question or interrogate the presenter of the amendment.
The member from Dover is interrogated.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, when I supported this and advocated in the rural caucus, low and moderate income, middle income, as the name's been changed, you know, owner-occupied, full-time residents, another term for homesteaders. This was the need that we felt rural Vermont and all of Vermont needed more housing stock. People that could work in our schools or work as nurses, EMTs, school bus drivers, serve our communities across the board. So why is it that this amendment, reporter, is it being singled out to one that supports, what are they called, short-term rentals and vacation homes?
Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I'm not sure why it's being singled out, because one of the very objectionable pieces to our municipalities that is in the Ways and Means Amendment about having to continue to certify that these are primary residences, it is still in there. So this does not change it. That requirement still is in the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It doesn't answer my question, but thank you.
So the question is, shall the amendment offered by the member from Woodstock and others be amended as offered by the member from Dover and others? Are you ready for the question? Member from Bradford.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of this amendment, an amendment grounded in the voices of members who represent communities from every corner of Vermont. We are in a housing crisis. Vermonters across the state are crying out for relief. And while we talk often about addressing this crisis, this is the moment to act by removing needless barriers that stand in the way of building homes. The Community Housing Infrastructure Program, or CHIP, is a promising tool. But if we are serious about unleashing its potential for real impact, we must fix what's holding it back. This amendment does just that. It expands the definition of improvements to include electrical infrastructure because no housing gets built without it. It lowers the floor area threshold to 51%, allowing more flexibility for projects to qualify. It removes the outdated, unnecessary but-for test from the application process. It eliminates the but-for test entirely. And it removes the requirement to create rules around the test because there is no longer a test to justify. The but-for test is bureaucratic red tape. The need for housing is self-evident. The tax increment being used is public revenue to fund public infrastructure that supports all Vermonters. We don't means test roads, bridges, or water lines. Why should housing infrastructure be treated any differently? This test will only disadvantage pro-growth towns that have taken steps to improve housing development and burden small towns that are just trying to get projects off the ground. That is the opposite of what we need. What CHIP does well and why we're fighting to improve it is that it encourages collaboration. It brings developers and municipalities to the same table. It rewards partnerships. It reflects an all-hands-on-deck approach to solving a crisis that no single sector can solve alone. And that's what Vermonters expect from us, to listen, to respond, and to act. This amendment reflects the needs of our communities and the urgency of this moment. Let's show the people of Vermont that we're listening and that we're serious about building homes, not building hurdles.
Are you ready for the question? Member from Essex Junction.
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition of this amendment. We need more housing in Vermont. We need more housing in our rural communities, in our flood-damaged communities, everywhere in the state. I'm voting no on this amendment because I want to make sure our limited resources go where they need to build housing, to strengthen our grand list, to use public dollars where they are needed, and to not waste them where they aren't needed. I also want to make sure to protect our schools. So I'm voting no to ensure that we have appropriate guardrails on the education fund. I urge others to join me in voting no.
Are you ready for the question? Member from Cambridge.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of this amendment. CHIP has the potential to be a transformative tool, and this amendment seeks to improve it. By removing unnecessary barriers, we can enhance the partnership between developers and municipalities that CHIP encourages. We can't afford unnecessary hurdles, especially when we need 41,000 more homes in 5 years. I urge members to join me in supporting this amendment. We are taking a significant step towards addressing Vermont's housing crisis and ensuring that all corners of Vermont have access to developing the homes they need.
Member from Dover.
Madam Speaker, I apologize. I will be brief, but I failed to include in my previous comments 0% of zero is zero. And when we talk about this program is a growing the Grand List program, which means growing the education fund program. So I think we just need to be really clear about that. Thank you.
The question is, shall the amendment offered by the member from Woodstock and others be amended as offered by the member from Dover and others? Member from Woodstock.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At the risk of exhausting the body to the sound of my voice, there's no doubt that we have a need for a substantial number of housing units in the state to meet the current need. However, we also have an obligation to make sure that we're using public funds wisely. The but-for test is not an onerous test, especially when it's talking about real estate development. As the member from Calais said, they either pencil out or they don't. So a developer in the process of working with a town can then quickly determine whether or not the project is going to work based on the numbers and the costs and everything else, and say, I can't build this because I don't have enough in my financial stack in order to make it work financially, either on a rental basis or on a sale basis. And that really is the fundamental of the but-for test. I can't build it without the infrastructure, without this TIF payment. It would be irresponsible of us not to ask for the but-for test and to then allow developers to use this tool who actually don't need it for projects that don't need it. That would be irresponsible. I urge the body to vote no on this amendment because the but-for test really is important. And thank you for your patience and indulgence.
Are you ready for the question? If so, member from Hartford.
Madam Speaker, I'd like your permission to speak in support of S-127 and the compromise amendment from the member from Woodstock.
Member, I'd like to just remind the member we're on the question of the amendment from the member from Dover.
Okay.
Is that
So they're going to be done separately?
yes? So the vote right now is whether the amendment offered by the member from Woodstock and others is amended by the member from Dover and others. So this question is on yes. Okay. So the question is, shall the amendment offered by the member from Woodstock and others be amended as offered by the member from Dover and others? Are you ready for the question? If so, will the clerk please call the roll?
Arsenault of Williston.
2 minutes. Will the House please come to order and members kindly take their seats? I would like to remind members that we are in the middle of a roll call vote. Members and guests are prohibited from using computers, phones, or any type of an electronic device. Please refrain from the passing of notes and conversation during a roll call. And when the clerk calls your name, please answer in a loud and clear voice so the clerk can accurately record your votes. The question is, shall the amendment offered by the member from Woodstock and others be amended as offered by the member from Dover and others? Will the clerk please continue to call the roll?
Austin of Colchester. Bailey of Hyde Park. Bartholomew of Heartland. Bartley of Fairfax. Berbecko of Winooski. Byrong of Vergennes. Bishop of Colchester. Black of Essex. Bloomley of Burlington. Boslin of Westminster. Bosch of Clarendon. Bootenberry City. Boyden of Cambridge. Brady of Williston. Brannigan of Georgia. Brown of Richmond. Burdett of West Rutland. Burke of Brattleboro. Burkhardt of South Burlington. Burrows of West Windsor. Bird of Cabot. Campbell of St. Johnsbury. Canfield of Fairhaven. Carrie Stunkin of Whitingham. Casey of Montpelier. Casey of Hubbardton. Chapin of East Montpelier. Charlton Chester. Christie of Hartford. Chena of Burlington. Coffin of Cavendish. Cole of Hartford. Conlon of Cornwall. Cooper of Pownell. Corcoran of Bennington. Cordes of Bristol. Critchlow of Colchester. Tamar of Venusburg. Dickinson of St. Albans Town. Dobrovich of Williamstown. Dodge of Essex. Dolan of Essex Junction. Dolgan of St. Johnsbury. Donahue of Northfield. Duke of Brattleboro. Durfee of Shaftesbury. Eastus of Guilford. Emmons of Springfield. Feltus of Linden. Galfetti of Berrytown. Garofano of Essex. Gorman of Rockingham. Goodnow of Brattleboro. Ghostland of Northfield. Granting of Jericho. Greer of Bennington. Gregoire of Fairfield. Hengo of Berkshire. Harpel of Glover. Harrison of Chittenden. Harvey of Castleton. Hedrick of Burlington. Higley of Lowell. Holcomb of Norwich. Hooper of Randolph. Hooper of Burlington. Houghton of Essex Junction. Howard of Rutland City. Holland of Rutland Town. Hunter of Manchester. James of Manchester. Kosenska of Burke. Keyser of Rutland City. Kimball of Woodstock. Klepner of Burlington. Kornheiser of Brattleboro. Krasnow, South Burlington. Labor of Morgan. Lally of Shelburne. Lalone of South Burlington. Lamont of Morristown. LaRush of Franklin. Lipsky of Stowe. Logan of Burlington. Long and Newfane. Luno of St. Albans City. McGuire of Rutland City. Malaya Pittsburgh.
Marquardt of Coventry. Maslin of Thetford. McKenna Montpelier. McCoy Pulteney. McFawn of Berrytown. McGill of Bridport. Mickless of Milton. Mahali of Callis. Minier of South Burlington. Morganella Milton. Morgan-Emma Milton. Morse of Springfield. Morrissey of Bennington. Morrow of Weston. Rowicky of Putney. Nelson of Derby. Nielsen of Brandon. Nigro of Bennington. North of Ferrisburg. Noise of Wookett. Noise of Wookett. Nugent of South Burlington. O'Brien of Tunbridge. Odie Burlington. Oliver of Sheldon. Olson of Starksboro. Page of Newport City. Parsons of Newberry. Pezzo of Colchester. Pinton of Dorset. Pouch of Heinsberg. Powers of Waterford. Priestley of Bradford. Pritchard of Pollitt. Quimby of Linden. Rachelson of Burlington. Sekowitz of Randolph. Shy of Middlebury. Sheldon of Middlebury. Sibylla of Dover. Southworth of Walden. Squirrel of Underhill. Steady of Milton. Stevens of Waterbury. Stone of Burlington. Supernaut of Barnard. Sweeney of Shelburne. Taglavia Corinth. Taylor of Milton. Tomlinson of Winooski. Tufus of Town. Torrey of Moortown. Walker of Swanton. Wells of Zackberry City. Waters Evans of Charlotte. Wells of Brownington. White of Waitsfield. White of Bethel. Winter of Ludlow. Wood of Waterbury. Yakavoni Morristown. Campbell of St. Johnsbury. Conlon of Cornwall. Dobrovich of Williamstown. Donahue of Northfield. Ghostland of Northfield. Higley of Lowell. Hunter of Manchester. McCann of Montpelier. Nigro of Bennington. White of Waitsfield. White of Bethel. Winter of Ludlow.
For purpose of explanation, member from Fairfax.
Today I vote yes, not only as an individual Vermonter, but as a representative for my community. Our constituents' voices are integral to our democratic process, and I will ensure that their voices are heard and they will not be stifled.
Member from Fairfield.
I vote yes on this amendment because at some point the concerns of rural Vermont have to be taken seriously, and today seems like a good day to do that.
Member from Berkshire.
Madam Speaker, but for if infrastructure were going to be built without public dollars, it would have been built long ago and we would not be in a housing crisis.
Member from Starksboro.
Madam Speaker, I voted no on these amendments, but I expect the Committee of Conference to come back with an improved bill that rises to the challenge of Vermont's housing crisis. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member from Bradford.
I vote yes because the need for housing is self-evident. The tax increment being used is public revenue to fund public infrastructure. Let's show the people of Vermont that we're listening and that we are serious about building homes, not building hurdles.
Member from Morristown.
This amendment is supposed to help rural Vermont, but for utilities, square footage, I'm not sure what they have to do with rurality. Location surely does, and that's been addressed. I vote no.
Will the House please come to order? Members, please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yes, 53. Those voting no, 86. The nays have it, and you have declined to amend the amendment offered by the member from Woodstock and others. So now the question is, shall the report of the Committee on Ways and Means be amended as offered by the member from Woodstock and others? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the report of the Committee on Ways and Means. Now the question is, shall the report of the Committee on General and Housing be amended as recommended by the Committee on Ways and Means as amended? Are you ready for that question? Member from Poultney. Okay. The question is, shall the report of the Committee on General and Housing be amended as recommended by the Committee on Ways and Means as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the report of the Committee on General and Housing. Now the question is, shall the House propose to the Senate to amend the bill as recommended by the Committee on General and Housing as amended? Member from Poultney.
Madam Speaker, at the beginning of this legislative session, just like the beginning of last session, the administration worked with members of this body to develop a housing bill that would make a meaningful difference for Vermonters. That bill included investments, permitting reform, appeals reform, and improvements to state systems, all in support of housing. Here we are in the final days of the session with no regulatory reform or appeals reform before us. We no longer have the glut of federal funds to invest as we did in recent years. We need to stop telling ourselves that funding traditional housing programs alone is going to help us meet the need on housing. Investment without reform and new tools will never solve our housing crisis. This session has produced one shining opportunity to make a meaningful difference in housing. That's with project-based TIF. The administration, as well as our colleagues in the Senate, have been able to largely agree on a framework for a program to support the financing of infrastructure for housing. We need to recognize the robust process that produced CHIP as it arrived in our House, and the productive dialogue that continued in the policy committees in the House and the committees on Commerce and in General and Housing. While key points of disagreement remained as the bill left the policy committees, the degrees of separation were manageable, and there seemed to be a productive path to compromise. The Ways and Means Amendment complicates the attempt to help those communities that want to grow stronger and offer the residents the housing that they have been begging for. I acknowledge efforts in recent days to amend the proposal from the Ways and Means Committee. However, there are too many concerning provisions in the Ways and Means Amendment to make it workable. It is crucial that we pass a form of CHIP that will benefit rural communities, which does not place unnecessary limitations and burdens on applicants, and which increases access to infrastructure. We cannot overcomplicate this tool when our constituents are in desperate need of housing. I have heard some members imply that we are already producing enough housing to meet our needs. The reality is that while we may be producing slightly more housing units than we were 5 years ago, thanks to the massive influx of pandemic-era federal investment, we are still producing housing at historically low rate statewide. And we know that it will slow even more as that federal influx of funding no longer exists. We have to do what Vermonters are asking us to do, significantly change the trajectory of our housing market to provide them with more opportunity and stronger, healthier communities. Vermonters deserve nothing less. I will vote no, and when the vote is taken, I request it be taken by roll.
The member from Poultney requests that when the vote is taken, it be taken by roll. Is the member sustained? The member is sustained. When the vote is taken, it will be taken by roll. The question is, shall the House propose to the Senate to amend the bill as recommended by the Committee on General and Housing as amended? Member from Hartford.
Madam Speaker, I'd like permission to speak in support of S127. Specifically in regard to the member from Woodstock's amendment. When I need to reset myself, I go to our state song. You know, these green hills and silver waters are my home. They belong to me and to all her sons and daughters. May they be strong and forever free. Members, our work is not an exact science. We are sent here by our fellow Vermonters to do the best, our best, in providing their voice to the policy work before us. Madam Speaker, may I share a brief story?
You may.
We have an opportunity to provide more options to communities across Vermont that are looking to create their own response to the need for additional housing options. After my wife's stroke, we came close to losing our home. Yet there was help that our legislator, in its wisdom at that time, provided for all Vermonters, including our family, and that was the VHAP program. And I remember the difficulty we had getting that through at one point, and that was the Vermont Housing Assistance Program. Fast forward today, still here, able to do our work. I ask us to remember the words of Dr. King from his Birmingham jail letter. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Fellow members, please join me in voting yes on this and S127. Thank you.
The question is, shall the House propose to the Senate to amend the bill as recommended by the Committee on General and Housing as amended? Member from St. Albans City.
Madam Speaker, may I interrogate the member from Calais?
The member from Calais is interrogated.
Okay. Madam Speaker, Section 11, which appears toward the bottom of page 3509 today, speaks about items which may be used in order to conduct a background or credit check. Specifically, an original or a copy of any expired form of government identification. May that be any form of government identification?
Madam Speaker, if it is original and it is unexpired and it is issued by a government, yes.
So, Madam Speaker, would a library or pool pass identification that is not expired then qualify because it was issued by a government?
Madam Speaker, I didn't hear the second. I heard library. What was the other?
If a municipal pool were to issue identification that were not expired, would that qualify as a government identification?
I don't know, Madam Speaker, if a library card would qualify. It would depend on the library. and I don't know whether a pool card would. However, we heard testimony from one of the largest landlord assistance organizations in the country that with any kind of identification, such as listed here, a date of birth and an address and a name, background checks were routinely conducted.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am not familiar with how to run a background check with a library card or a pool pass, but I appreciate the responses from the member from Calais.
Are you ready for the question? Member from Woodstock.
Madam Speaker, there is an impression that the Community and Housing Infrastructure Program, before it came to Ways and Means, was really simple for a municipality or a developer to use. And that can't be further from the truth. It requires a housing development site, a housing infrastructure project, and a housing infrastructure agreement. These are not easy documents to put together. And in the process of a municipality working with a developer to develop that whole package and that whole application, everything that we're talking about or has been objected to as a barrier would actually come to pass in the information that was put together. So this bill is a good financial tool. It is not going to solve all of the problems that exist in the creation of housing. I would urge the body to support this bill. Thank you.
Member from Chittenden.
Madam Speaker, may I inquire of the reporter from Ways and Means?
The member from Woodstock is interrogated.
Madam Speaker, when we heard the committee version of the bill, maybe it was the new amendment, there was some conversation about perpetual residency. And I don't remember where all the answers, so I apologize if I'm repeating myself. But my understanding, Madam Speaker, is that the development that might qualify for a CHIP has to be all for primary residences. And I applaud that goal because that's what we need, primary residence. However, Madam Speaker, if you purchased a home in this development and something happens somewhere down the road where you need to move for a couple of years to take care of a loved one, a parent or whatever, but you maintain that home because you hope to get back to Vermont in a couple of years. What happens in that situation, Madam Speaker?
Thank you for that question. There's two different parts of, the easy answer is not much, but there are two parts of the amendment that apply to it. One is in housing that is qualifies as mixed income housing as it is amended and qualifies for that higher retention of tax increment. And in those instances, if they are governed by a covenant, which is recorded in the town land records, that covenant would actually control how that situation would occur. Any kind of restrictions in terms of the income level of the people that live there or what they can do with the property and selling it. The other is that it has to be a bona fide domicile, offered at a bona fide domicile, either by ordinance or by the agreement that exists in place. As to how that could be governed, that is a separate question, but I'd say, member, that really it depends on the particular situation, if it is one of those that is governed by a covenant and one that isn't.
Madam Speaker, earlier we heard a list of various people that the Ways and Means Committee heard from. Were any of them town officials that might be able to talk about how they're going to keep track of the residency covenants that might be in this development.
Yes, thank you for the question. Most of the time, we did not speak to municipal managers. We did speak with those that already manage covenants where their units are restricted in some way or form. So those organizations actively manage covenants either in projects that they own or even projects that they don't own but manage for others.
Madam Speaker, did the committee hear from mortgage lenders and whether or not this was going to make it easier or more difficult to obtain financing?
We did not speak with mortgage lenders specifically. We did not take testimony. We were looking at providing this level of financing. Remember, not all properties would have that kind of covenant attached to it. We do know, I'll stop there, member.
Thank you, member. Madam Speaker, this poses a lot of questions for me in terms of what happens. What if, when I get older, some might say I am older, and I had the wherewithal to purchase a property elsewhere where it's warmer, and like many people do, declare the residency elsewhere. I don't know if I'd be able to do that. Not that I am in that position, but if I were. I wonder what happens when you go to sell the property. You're only restricted to selling to someone who's got to commit to being a Vermont resident, which we want, but I think when it's time to sell, I want to be able to sell. And if you put restrictions on me, that may cost me in the end. So, Madam Speaker, I will be voting no on this bill. I really wish we could have done better. Thank you.
The question is, shall the House propose to the Senate to amend the bill as recommended by the Committee on General and Housing as amended? Are you ready for the question? Member from Essex Junction.
Madam Speaker, I am voting yes on S127 because it directly addresses Vermont's critical need for housing by expanding affordable and accessible housing options. The bill invests in critical infrastructure, supports rehabilitation of existing units, and prioritizes vulnerable populations. It also supports long-term affordability and transparency through regulatory reforms and data reporting. And it protects taxpayer dollars while creating a new program that will help small communities build housing. This is a good housing bill, and I encourage the body to vote yes.
Are you ready for the question? Member from Fairfax.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In this building, not just this chamber, we hear that we cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure if there are parts of this bill that are even good. But, and it is not perfect, I will be voting yes because I refuse to be another barrier to housing that we've seen for the last 30 years. And in hopes that the conference committee, in good faith, really hears the voices of those of us who are concerned about the barriers put in the CHIP language.
Are you ready for the question? Member from Coventry.
Madam Speaker, I'd just like the body to remember that this is a proposition. It's not, it doesn't exist yet. There's all kinds of what ifs. And we won't know that until this is created, until the rules are made, until it starts to be put into action. It's not perfect. I don't know that there's ever been a bill since my time here that's been perfect. We have the ability going down the road to better understand from data that's collected, that's sent back to us from VEPSI, of how things are going. What kind of roadblocks are you seeing? Are municipalities, are there roadblocks to them? This is what you need to do to make this work. But those, right now, we're in unknown territory. We don't know. And if you vote no, we still won't know. Voting yes gives us a chance to move forward and figure it out and make the changes that are necessary going down the road. So I urge the body to please vote yes on this. Thank you.
The question is, shall the House propose to the Senate to amend the bill as recommended by the Committee on General and Housing as amended? Are you ready for the question? Member from Cavendish.
Madam Speaker, I know I'm new here, it's my first session. I've already seen too many bills leave out of this chamber that we look around and say, well, it's not perfect, but we'll hope it gets better. And I have voted for some in the hopes it would get better, even though I didn't like it. This time I can't do that. I urge the body to say no and that we do the job the people are telling us to do and make something that's right, not just barely adequate.
The question is, shall the House propose to the Senate to amend the bill as recommended by the Committee on General and Housing as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, will the clerk please call the roll?
Arsenault of Williston.
2 minutes. Will the House please come to order? Will the House please come to order and members kindly take their seats? I would like to remind members that we are in the middle of a roll call vote. Members and guests are prohibited from using computers, phones, or any type of electronic device. Please refrain from the passing of notes and conversation during a roll call. And when the clerk calls your name, please answer in a loud and clear voice so the clerk can accurately record your votes. The question is, shall the House propose to the Senate to amend the bill as recommended by the Committee on General and Housing as amended? Will the clerk please continue to call the roll?
Austin of Colchester. Bailey of Hyde Park. Bartholomew of Heartland. Bartley of Fairfax. Rebecca of Winooski. Byrong of Virgins. Bishop of Colchester. Black of Essex. Bloomley of Burlington. Boston of Westminster. Bosch of Clarendon. Booton City. Boyden of Cambridge. Brady of Williston. Brannigan of Georgia. Brown of Richmond. Burdett of West Rutland. Burke of Brattleboro. Burkhart of South Burlington. Burrows of West Windsor. Bird of Cabot. Campbell of St. Johnsbury. Canfield of Fairhaven. Carrie Duncan of Whitingham. Casey of Montpelier. Casey of Hubbardton. Chapin of East Montpelier. Charlton of Chester. Christie of Hartford. Sheena of Burlington. Coffin of Cavendish. Cole of Hartford. Conlon of Cornwall. Cooper of Pownell. Corcoran of Bennington. Cordes of Bristol. Critchlow of Colchester. Damar of Venusburg. Dickinson of St. Albans Town. Dobrovich of Williamstown. Dodge of Essex. Dolan of Essex Junction. Dolgan of St. Johnsbury. Donahue of Northfield. Duke of Burlington. Durfee of Shaftesbury. Eastus of Guilford. Emmons of Springfield. Feltus of Linden. Galfetti of Berrytown. Garifano of Essex. Coleman of Rockingham. Goodnow of Brattleboro. Ghostland of Northfield. Granting of Granting of Jericho. Greer of Bennington. Gregoire of Fairfield. Hengo Berkshire. Harpo of Glover. Harrison of Chittenden. Harvey of Castleton. Hedrick of Burlington. Higley of Lowell. Holcomb of Norwich. Hooper of Randolph. Hooper of Burlington. Houghton of Essex Junction. Howard of Rutland City. Holland of Rutland Town. Hunter of Manchester. James of Manchester. Kosenska of Burke. Keyser, Rutland City. Campbell Woodstock. Klepner, Burlington. Kornheiser, Brattleboro. Krasnow, South Burlington. Labor, Morgan. Lally, Shelburne. Lolonde of South Burlington. Lamont of Morristown. LaRush of Franklin. Lipsky of Stowe. Logan of Burlington. Long of Newfane. Luna of St. Albans City. McGuire of Rutland City. Malay of Pittsford. Marcotte of Coventry. Maslin of Thetford. McCann of Montpelier. McCoy of Pulteney. McFawn of Berrytown. McGill of Bridport. McLiss of Milton. Mahalia Callis. Minier of South Burlington. Morganella Milton. Morgan Emma Milton. Morse Springfield. Morse Bennington. Maura Weston. Rowan Putney. Nelson of Derby. Nielsen of Brandon. Niagara Bennington. North of Ferrisburg. Noyes of Wolcott. Nugent of South Burlington. O'Brien of Tunbridge. Odie of Burlington. Oliver of Sheldon. Olson of Starksboro. Page in Newport City. Parsons of Newberry. Pezzo of Colchester. Pinson of Dorset. Pouch of Heinsberg. Powers of Waterford. Priestley of Bradford. Pritchard of Pollitt. Quimby of Linden. Rachelson of Burlington. Sackwitz of Randolph. Shy Middlebury. Sheldon of Middlebury. Sibilia of Dover. Southworth of Walden. Squirrel of Underhill. Steady of Milton. Stevens of Waterbury. Stone of Burlington. Supernaut of Barnard. Sweeney of Shelburne. Taglavia Corinth. Taylor Milton. Tomlinson Winooski. Tufus Town. Torrymore Town. Walker Swanton. Wazoo Zachaberry City. Waters Evans Charlotte. Wells of Brownington. White of Waitsfield. White of Bethel. Winter of Ludlow. Wood of Waterbury. Yakavoni Morristown. Campbell St. Johnsbury. Chena of Burlington. Dobrovich of Williamstown. Donahue's Northfield. Higley of Lowell. Hooper of Randolph. Hunter of Manchester. McCann Montpelier. Niagara of Bennington. Parsons of Newberry. White of Waitsfield. White of Bethel. Winter of Ludlow.
For purpose of explanation, member from South Burlington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Addressing market failure is where there is a role for government subsidy. The guardrails on CHIP are meant to target precious taxpayer dollars toward the part of the market that has failed most spectacularly, homes for low, moderate, and middle-income Vermonters. My hope for CHIP is that the but-for test helps ensure that incentives are directed to smaller developers doing smaller projects in parts of the state that have not attracted private capital. Thank you.
Member from Pownell.
Madam Speaker, I voted yes because the bill allows the state of Vermont to invest in its own middle class. Today, the middle class must rely more on luck than anything to find a home. If the American dream is not accessible in Vermont, Americans will continue to pursue that dream beyond our borders. Worse still, Vermonters will be forced to do the same, and I am sorry to say that they are doing so now. I do believe that we could have done more here, as do many on the third, fourth, and fifth floors, but it is my expectation that this legislation will demonstrate how much more we need in a concrete way. This lifts us out of the hypothetical realm that has stifled us for too long.
Member from Essex.
Madam Speaker, I enthusiastically support S127 because it removes permitting hurdles and makes powerful investments for those seeking and for those developing our much-needed housing. But as we heard from contractors, these investments won't expand housing if we cannot expand our labor workforce. So to that end, this bill protects Vermont's growing immigrant population's right to rent housing without facing discrimination. The very people who will help us build our way out of our housing crisis should have fair housing access.
Member from St. Johnsbury.
I voted yes because Vermont needs housing, but I was hoping for a housing bill that would help use the Vermont landlords as a partner in the landscape of this housing crisis. This bill does not do that.
Member from South Burlington.
Across our state, more Vermonters are struggling to find housing. This crisis disproportionately impacts low to moderate income families, individuals with disabilities, seniors, and those transitioning out of homelessness. The need for action is urgent. S127 offers a comprehensive solution, not only by increasing the number of housing units, but also by ensuring these units remain affordable and accessible to those who need them most.
Member from Milton.
Madam Speaker, this bill is still too restrictive to be of practical use solving the housing crisis. Nevertheless, I voted yes because I would rather have 50% of something than 100% of nothing.
Member from Ferrisburg.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I voted no on S127. This bill falls short of what we need to support rural housing development. I'm holding out for H479 is passed back to us by the Senate.
Member from Starksboro.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I voted yes on the bill and the amendment. I expect the committee conference will come back with an improved bill that rises to the challenge of Vermont's housing crisis in all areas of the state. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member from Milton.
While I understand the need for affordable housing, I voted no due to the what ifs. I was voted as a representative to make well-informed votes and not a what if bill. I believe we can do better.
Member from Waterbury.
Madam Speaker, I voted yes because I represent two of the most rural towns in Chittenden County, Bolton and Huntington. S127 is more likely to incentivize housing development rather than penalize those parts of the state who currently have less development activity.
Member from Jericho.
May I explain my vote?
You may.
We currently need many programs to build the housing and the infrastructure that is required to support that housing. S127 gives all of Vermont more resources to do both. It will take all of these tools and more to reach our goals, but this sets us on the path to build the affordable primary residences we so desperately need.
Members, please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yes, 100. Those voting no, 36. The ayes have it, and you have proposed to the Senate to amend the bill. Now the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and third reading is ordered. Members, the final bill on our action calendar today is House Bill 482, which is an act relating to Green Mountain Care Board authority to adjust a hospital's reimbursement rates and to appoint a hospital observer. The bill passed the Senate with a proposal of amendment that is printed in today's calendar. Member from Essex.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So H482 passed out of this body back on March 21st. As you may recall, or maybe not recall, it's a bill that allows the Green Mountain Care Board the authority to adjust a hospital's commercial insurance reimbursement rates when there's a significant risk to a health insurer's solvency. This came back to us from the Senate this week as a strike-all amendment, but there are really only 4 minor clarifications and additions. I'm going to just point those out to you. So in section 1, which is section 1 allows the board to reduce or reallocate rates to protect an insurer's solvency, they clarified in 1B that the board's orders are not considered a contested case and that they will have the same appeal procedures as set forth in 18 VSA 9381. 18 VSA 9381 is the piece of statute that lays out the board's appeals process and that allows due process to the Supreme Court. Also in Section 1, C2, there is an addition to ensure that they shall consider any other competing financial obligations of either the hospital or the insurer when determining rate reductions. That's things such as the bond rating of the hospital or the insurer. In Section 2, C4, which is in the hospital's budget review section of 18 VSA 9456, it cleans up language that directs the Green Mountain Care Board in setting hospital budgets to account for any significant deviation in a hospital's revenue during the prior fiscal year that's in excess of the budget that was approved by the board. And lastly, in Section 2G2A, it adds language that the independent observer that the board may appoint shall just be a person with experience and expertise relevant to the specific circumstances. So those are the 4 changes that the Senate made to H482. They enhanced and clarified the underlying bill, and they're really only technical in nature. And on a straw poll of 632, your Committee on Healthcare recommends that we concur with the Senate proposal of amendment, and we ask for your support. Thank you.
The question is, shall the House concur in the Senate proposal of amendment? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have concurred in the Senate proposal of amendment. Members, that completes the orders of the day. Members, I have 2 announcements to make. The first is that we have received a message from the Senate notifying us that the Senate has refused to concur in the House proposal of amendment on Senate Bill 12, which is an act relating to sealing criminal history records, and requested a committee of conference and appointed its members thereto. Pursuant to that action, the chair appoints the following members to serve on the part of the House: the member from South Burlington, Representative Lalone; the member from West Rutland, Representative Burdett; and the member from Essex Junction, Representative Dolan. Also, earlier today, the Committee on Ways and Means reported favorably on Senate Bill 122, which is an act relating to economic and workforce development. Carrying an appropriation, the bill is referred to the Committee on Appropriations pursuant to House Rule 35A, pending its entry on the notice calendar. Are there any announcements? Seeing none. Member from Poultney, can you please offer us a motion to adjourn until Tuesday, May 27th at 10 a.m.?
Madam Speaker, I make a motion this body stand in adjournment until Tuesday, May 27th, 2025 at 10 a.m.
Will the House please come to order? You've heard the motion. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes appear